Hi everyone, my name is Miles and I'm with Peak Performers. Welcome back to another episode of Disability Weekly, where I have a chance to interview many interesting people about their specific lived experience and their perspective on our world of disability, neurodiversity, and chronic health within the workplace. Today I'm very excited to bring Rivers onto the show. They have an incredible perspective talking about changing the system, not the person, which is such an incredibly important part of the conversation because oftentimes that's the default, right? We show up to work and it is this way that works for most people, or so that is the presumption. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about challenging that assumption that we're making and really rethinking the workplace in a way that is better able to support all individuals as they show up for work and not forcing them to adapt. That said, I want to take a second. Please drop in a comment if you are joining us live right now to introduce yourself, and please connect with the other people that are joining us live. This is a great way for us to build community together. And please also share your perspective. If you could wave your magic wand and change one thing within the workplace in regards to neuroinclusion, what would that be? What would you change? Having said all that, Lyric, welcome. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really thrilled to be here. I love this. It's gonna be fun.
I agree. I agree. I enjoy talking to fun people, and I talked with you, and I was like, Lyric is a fun person, like such a dynamic personality and stuff. But before we did dive into it, we'll get into this a little bit more later. But what are those behind your right shoulder there?
These are a few of the books I've worked on and collaborated with, and there's one more not here yet that hasn't been printed. But I've got a business ethics book, Workplace Neurodiversity Rising. Autism Identity Me is a workbook for autistic young people to help them learn on an individual level what being autistic means to them. There's an adult version coming this fall. And this is
Cool.
The Weight of Normal, which is my latest self-published book that talks about self. It's a self journey about my experience with forced assimilation as a neurodivergent young person. And a lot of that for me is I didn't know I was neurodivergent for a lot of my life. So having my neurodivergence seen and treated through a behavioral lens. And so these are just a few of my projects, and writing is something that I really love to do. And so it's just really exciting to have the books here.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing each of your books right there. I did drop a link into the comments right before the show started, so any of y'all that are joining us live can feel free to go there and check out any of Lyric's books. But I want to dive right into the topic at hand,
Yeah.
and that is talking a little bit more about the workplace. So paint a picture for me, particularly through the lens of multiple different people with various different kinds of neurodiversity. So, say, for
Mm-hmm.
example, you have ADHD or autism, or you have a traumatic brain injury, or you have depression, right? Like, paint a picture for me about what they experience when they walk in through a normal office place.
So that's going to vary widely because those are all very different conditions. And also, even, for example, two autistic people, depending on how our brains are configured, can have very different experiences from one another. But, if we're trying to make it as general as possible, unfortunately, a lot of workplaces are set up in a way that doesn't necessarily support these differences. And there's a wide spectrum of human differences that is far beyond even what you mentioned. And so when we're in a workplace that doesn't see us and expects us to assimilate into existing systems without being willing to flex and meet us where our needs are, it puts a lot of pressure on us often to try and conform and tone ourselves down and hold back and not share about our needs. And so it makes it really hard for us to get our needs met, and often means we have a lack of emotional safety, and we just kind of feel like outsiders in the workplace. And at least in my experience, many neurodivergent people, we come and we really want to give our full selves to anything we do, but when we're having to leave giant parts of who we are behind, including our needs and our experiences, it makes it very hard for us to do that and for us to engage and be our best, most authentic and effective selves in the places we enter. And this is beyond workplaces too. This can go into all kinds of relationships. Really, it applies very broadly to our world and all of its systems.
Wow. Okay. And I'm most familiar with hiring systems, and that is the world that I play in. And I will maintain that There are many different elements to the hiring process, everything from the way the job description is written to the way that it's screened by AI these days or applicant tracking systems, all the way up to interview norms that are very constant and persistent that consistently keep people out. But it's also important to note too that many individuals, they might get hired, but then struggle to be able to rise within the organization, get that promotion. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, I had Mark Sonis on to talk a little bit more about why it is that so often leadership is dominated by the quote unquote neurotypical. But I want to talk about other systems at play. When you talk about kind of like friction with other workplace systems, could you paint a picture of like other kinds of systems that you're clashing with?
Really, it can be all of them, honestly, which is really unfortunate. I honestly, when I do my work consulting with organizations, I am talking them out of focusing on hiring most of the time because that's where they want to jump in and start. But my experience and then point of view working with organizations is that a lot of times the organizational culture and policies and procedures can be set up in a way that if they were to start right with hiring with that system, you're going to be, like flowers that you're planting in the wrong dirt with the wrong pH and the wrong moisture and the wrong amount of sun. Like every flower needs a different set up to survive and thrive. People are a lot like that. And so, we can experience difficulties where, say after you're onboarded in that onboarding and training process, if people aren't taught the way they learn, if people aren't properly supported, maybe there's not a good handbook, maybe there's not consistency around policies and procedures. Maybe when we go to meetings, there's not a lot of clarity. And like when instructions are being handed off by leadership, it's like, oh, whenever you can get to it. And, for my autistic brain is just screaming when you're like, whatever you can get to it. It's like, no, please give me a concrete deadline. Like what, instead of whatever you can get to it, it's like, when do you need this? By the end of day, by tomorrow, by the end of the week, by the end of this month, like things like just the way communication happens in the workplace. And even things like networking, and when we're encouraged to have like fun activities where they can feel like they're mandatory and you can't opt out of them. And like all of these things where things are very like unspoken or kind of wishy-washy, all of it really can create obstacles and problems for neurodivergent people. And really, I think it creates problems for all of us, but as neurodivergent people, we often are the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak. So it's like the things that are making it really impossible for us to thrive in workplaces probably are bugging your neuronormative employees too, like honestly. And so, when we look at fixing these systems for neurodivergent people, and we are making sure the outliers can be included, it actually tends to make things better for everyone on your entire organization and team, because we need that clarity, and most people can appreciate clarity, in their workplace, and not having all of this, like, I'm not really sure what they mean by that. And, a lot of things like, if you're trying to get accommodations, as a person with a disability, we make a lot of that more standardized instead of like having like these really complicated processes where we access things and we start listening to people. It's like, what do you need to be successful? And you're not like forcing us to go through gatekeepers, because that's something that can also hold us back, because we might not always know we're neurodivergent. We might not be able to access the diagnosis. I was diagnosed when I was 29. So I've been in the workplace for a lot of years already when I was diagnosed. And so like those things can create obstacles too. If you like have to go to HR and you need all this documentation, but you've never been diagnosed, you still might know exactly what you need. And you're like, I need this. And they're like, but do you have a doctor's note? It's like, I've worked in all these other places, and when I had this, I was successful. You need me to go, it just creates unnecessary hurdles a lot of times. And so it's really like, unfortunately, it could be every single system you encounter, hiring all the way throughout, which is really unfortunate.
So that sounds like quite a task. And you talk about like, okay, before you buy the flowers, you want to make sure that the soil's ready for them. If a organization is listening to this and going, gosh, where do I even start? Where do they?
There's two places you can start. And I think it's going to depend on the organization, because every organization tends to be very unique. Number one would be either organizational culture, or number two, looking at policies, procedures, and systems. So I like to look at organizational culture first, personally, because in my experience, it's very likely, whether you know it or not, if you've got 10 to 20 people on your team, you've probably got neurodivergent team members.
Yeah.
And so that, if you know that you have neurodivergent team members or not, can be a really big red flag, because you likely have them whether they've told you or not. And if they haven't told you and nobody's speaking up, a lot of times that means maybe they don't feel safe speaking up, or that's the worst case scenario. Actually, worst case scenario is you don't have any and you're actually chasing them out of your workplace, and that means you've got some bad stuff going on there. Middle case would be they haven't told you because they don't feel safe. And then maybe in some cases, a lot of times it's like tech or engineering firms, if people are able to get their needs met so easily, they don't feel it's needed to disclose, because it's just everything can be done without having to tell anybody. They just feel like they don't need to mention it. That's like a best case scenario. But like trying to figure out, like, do you have neurodivergent team members? Have they disclosed to you? If not, why? And then looking at that culture. And so if you have an organizational culture where there is emotional safety, where people feel safe speaking about their needs and what they need to be successful, and when things aren't working for them, and also trust, so that they trust that when they speak up about what they need, it's not going to backfire on them, that really does make it so that your team members can tell you when you need to change procedures and policy. So for example, if your team members can say, hey, in this meeting format is really not working for me, or hey, it would be really helpful if I can get meeting agenda items in advance, or hey, can you send a follow-up with the due dates after this meeting? Like, if people can ask for these things, or people could say, hey, I would work better if I could work remotely. Can I work remote today? Or hey, I need to be left alone today so I can deep dive on this with no interruptions. Like, if people can just speak up regardless of their neurotype and say, this is what I need to be my best self, and organizations are willing to be flexible and let people flex the systems and spaces around them, then a lot of things neurodivergent people, and honestly people with a lot of different disabilities, need to be successful and thrive, can become universal design. And it really, when it becomes available to everyone in the team, regardless if you have some kind of magical doctor's note or not, it also has the benefit of the fact that we don't have to single ourselves out. Because I was in a workplace once and I asked for my accommodations and needs I needed because the systems weren't set up to suit me, and I was told that it wouldn't be fair to ask for give me what I was asking for, because everyone would want what I was asking for. It's like, sounds like the system is broken. Well, I had a few things, like either going back to working remote, because I was originally hired as a remote employee, or to sit in a corner with natural lighting and not have the bright fluorescent lights over my desk and be able to wear noise canceling headphones during my workday. And they're like, well, that's for management. You have to earn that. We can't give you special treatment. Everyone wants that. And that was kind of one of the aha moments that started to get this being written in the background all those years ago, because I'm like, if everyone wants it, your system sucks.
Well, and let's talk about that actually, because I think that that's such a common refrain that I hear from businesses. In other words, they say that, well, our business is set up to be able to suit most people, and so they think that they've done their work. Or you hear from HR that they say, well, we need to treat everybody the same and consistently. Where do those arguments start to break down when it comes to actually trying to create an inclusive workplace?
I think if it's leveraged correctly, that can be a good argument, because if you start to make things that are commonly requested by your employees, whether they're disabled or not, just accessible to everyone, like what is the normal run thing your team is asking for all the time? Are they always saying, I want more remote work days, or I want the availability to flex my schedule? Like if people are asking for these things all the time, like as my example, it's like everyone wants what you're asking for. Let's make it universally available, so if people want it, they can take it and they can use it if that's going to make their job better. And my ethos is, if it's not something that's going to cause harm to the business, and it's especially things that aren't going to be astronomically expensive, why are we telling people no when people know what they need to thrive and be successful? You know what I mean? And then also, if you're thinking about it, where people are really going through those formal accommodation loops, where it can fall short is, the assumptions that, all autistic people get this accommodation. all ADHDers get this accommodation. That doesn't work because all autistic people are different. Like my spouse and I, we're both autistic. We have very different sensory needs because we, a lot of us autistic people, we don't have just one neurotype. So I'm hyperlexic. I can absorb text really fast. I love all my instructions in writing. My partner is dyslexic and autistic, so they probably want to talk things through. And if you give them a wall of text and everything in an email, that's going to make their brain spin. And like that's like the opposite. Even though we're both autistic, so if you assume we universally need the same thing, it's not going to work well for us. And some like I am ADHD, and my best friend's also ADHD, but for me, I do best working alone, either in a room or at home, where nobody's going to talk to me. Don't cause more in distractions, because I am enough distraction. If you're also distracting me, that's not helpful. But my friend actually thrives going to an office, because that for them, it's more motivating to be sitting in a room with other people working. And it's like the body doubling thing. A lot of ADHDers like that body doubling. And I actually do some body doubling virtually. But I can mute everybody, so like nobody's gonna talk to me. I can turn off the notifications. But in an open office, you can't mute everybody. You can't tell everybody, shut up, that doesn't work well. And so like it depends very differently person to person, which is why really letting people say, like, this is what I need to be my best self. This is how you can best work with me. This is how I best communicate. This is how you can best help me shine and thrive. And really looking at like letting people have that flexibility to speak up about it.
Thank you for that. By the way, I want to say hello to Melissa, Michael, and Kate. Kate said 100% about the unnecessary gatekeeping. It doesn't benefit anyone. Thanks, Kate. Appreciate that. By the way, a couple weeks ago, I interviewed Kate talking about the experience of the cliff, which is where an individual receives support throughout the course of schooling, but then all of a sudden come to a cliff in being able to access support when they enter the workplace. Do check that out. It was a fascinating conversation. I want to actually dig in, because that was a really interesting point that you brought up, where you're talking about your friend, you were talking about your spouse, and you're talking about you and all the cognitive needs. Like, how do you navigate maybe some of the complexities within sensory needs? Because this comes up all the time within workplaces where people have various different needs. I was just talking with a job seeker the other day that was telling me a story about how she had lost her job recently because she needed to have the blinds drawn, but she had other coworkers sitting right beside her that needed to have the windows open to be able to feel like motivated and positive throughout the day. So how do you navigate that?
And that's really tricky too. And it depends on how large your space is, right? Because sometimes if you only have one small space, that can be really difficult to accommodate different needs. For me, like working remote is just so easy. If you can let people work remote, it really is the easiest thing a lot of times, because they I have full control here. But like in offices, when I'm helping people who have physical spaces, sometimes I've seen where they have different quiet work areas where people who need more control can go and sit in a darker, quiet room that has low lighting, maybe has like blankets and things so people can be warm. And it's like no talking in that room, or even letting people go to a conference room to work if you have conference rooms, and just being open to that. So, sometimes neurodivergent people, we need these things regularly, but even someone who might normally love that chaotic, loud, bright, busy room might be having a day where they're doing something stressful, something that's new to them, something they don't know how to do very well, or maybe they're on a deadline and they just need to be left alone to focus and not have any distractions. So letting people move in and out of these spaces can be really helpful, regardless of your neurotype, because everyone's different and what you need can vary day to day. With me, lighting is a big thing for me. Like, I need it to not be super bright, and the certain kinds of lights will actually start to give me like these really bad neurological problems and send me into hypervigilance, which, being hypervigilant, like your body's just like constantly fight or flight, and so messes with my stomach, messes with all kinds of things. It makes it really hard to like be calm and centered and focused. And so like I can't sit under those fluorescent lights all day. And so I've been in spaces personally where like my partner loves those bright lights too, and so it's like we have sensory polar opposites in that regard. And so like we have different lighting settings in the room where like there's warm lights and there's bright lights, and so depending on where I'm sitting, I can have the lower lights turned on over me and then you can have brighter lights over another person's desk. You can let people bring in their own lamps. You can have, like, I've seen people get those little leaf things that kind of cover the bright lights above the head. And then some places where how, like, this half of the room is bright, this half of the room is dark, and let people go sit in what half of the room is good for them. And so just really kind of getting creative with it, and being more aware of these things, like, say, smells can be a trigger for someone. And so letting someone who's sensitive to smells sit as far away from the kitchen or the bathroom as possible, for those reasons, because those things can kind of move through the office. Maybe having policies where people, please don't wear strong scents to your office, things like that, and just being more aware of it and having the conversation too, that we've all got these different needs. And maybe that's a compromise, like in the morning it's dark, in the afternoon, if it's bright, if it's like one smaller space, you might have to get more creative. Maybe you're in one room, or maybe there's like a way you can kind of have a cubicle situation going to where they kind of have their own little cave situation. But just being willing to get creative with it and think there might be a non-traditional option to make that happen. Because if they just think about, like, I don't know, whoever's listening right now, if you're the bright light person, think about how it would be to be forced to work in the dark all day. And if you're the darkness person, think about how it makes you feel to be forced to work in a bright light all day. Like, you're going to be uncomfortable. And why does one person, oh, can you still see me? Why does one person have to be the one that's going to be uncomfortable? Just because there's less people that have that specific need.
Absolutely. It's so complicated navigating all of these things. And speaking of navigating complicated situations, a lot of this comes down to age differences in my mind too, generational differences. Particularly, there might be a level of resentment where I didn't get these kinds of supports and yet I survived, right? Like, I hear that a lot. But there's also like kind of a sentiment too of like, well, it's always been this way, and so why would we change it for you? So how do you kind of reach across to people that haven't drinking the Kool-Aid of neurodiverse inclusion? Like, how do you reach across the aisle to try to get people to acknowledge your needs, but also to be able to try to better empathize and understand them?
Yeah, well, it makes me a little sad when I hear that I suffered, so everyone else should have to suffer too. Like, that's a terrible way to think of things. And there's a lot of people that are just kind of like that, which is really sad. But also, maybe if there's someone that doesn't understand that the other person really does need this, having the explanation that, like, for people who are neuro-average, neurotypical, in that neuro majority, those people are coming to a space that was designed with their needs in mind, optimized for their needs. And unfortunately, a lot of us neurodivergent people historically have been under or even unemployed a lot of times when we couldn't get our needs met. And so, maybe these accommodations weren't happening when some of these older generation people were in the workplace. And that's because neurodivergent people probably weren't working. Or we were, like, unfortunately, with a lot of autistic people growing up, and historically, autistic people were often told that we needed to just be locked away and institutionalized and kept away from society. Or, even in school, like, people say that about the schools. Like, we didn't have all these autistic kids when I was in school. It's like, no, they pushed us away and put us in special education rooms so you didn't have to see us. Like, I got kicked out of school and sent to a private school that was really horrible when I was in elementary school. And so it's like we were there. We were just being pushed out because we couldn't get our needs met. And so, we don't want people to be forced into unemployment. And unfortunately, today, there's still a lot of that pushback. And it is one of the biggest obstacles that keeps us from being equitably employed. And that's why I think a lot of neurodivergent people are drawn to self-employment. Because it lets us meet our own needs, because we get that kind of pushback. And unfortunately, you can't really make people have empathy for others if that's not something they naturally are inclined to do. It's something you have to get them to work on. And some people aren't willing to work on that, even though EQ is a skill that can grow. You can work on it. You can learn. But it's really tricky. But it's you can sometimes get them to look at it by saying, like, hey, like, what is it that you need? And say, if there's something you need that can make you a more effective worker, we can help you with that too. You don't have to suffer. Yeah, and hopefully we can share the love that these things are good for everyone. So, we're not just giving one person special treatment. We're empowering them with what they need to be successful, and we're really just leveling the playing field. It's not to lift one group above the other. It's fixing the designs that didn't take everyone into consideration from the beginning.
I love that. And you talk about how you were diagnosed at 29, and you talk about a lot of trouble with schooling, a lot of, I presume, like trouble kind of understanding yourself, probably a lot of conflict with your parents, I'm guessing here with some of this stuff. But what advice would you give to somebody right now that is a young adult, and maybe they are suspecting that they might be neurodivergent in some way, shape, or form? Like, what advice would you give to them about being able to navigate the workplace and possibly seek out a diagnosis?
So, whether you choose to seek a diagnosis or not, I would say the most important thing, regardless of even any specific labels, although knowing the labels can be so helpful because it can help you connect with others in your community. It can give you a starting point for like where you need to look about your own needs and things. But really, most important is really figuring out what your needs are and what you need to be the best version of yourself. So thinking about with neurodivergence, a lot of times it revolves around communication and emotional experiences, sensory experiences, how we're taking in and engaging with and processing the world, and how we're communicating and engaging outwardly with the world. So learning like what the best time of day you're most productive is, learning, do you work best in a quiet environment, or are you one of those people that I can't relate to, but you like to work in that chaos because the chaos energizes you and all that background noise makes you feel so good and amps you up? Like, if that's you, that's great. But like, learn, like, what is it that you need to be your best self? Are you someone who does best when you have as much information in advance as possible? Are you one of those wing it people, fly by the seat of your pants? Cool. Like, a lot of us can't do that. And just being more aware of these differences, like, what are your sensory needs? Do you get cold easy? Do you get hot easy? Are the lights something that bother you? Are you someone who's sensitive to sound, or all of that? And just learning like what your needs are and practicing how to communicate them with other people. And then being aware, unfortunately, in the workplace, when you're dealing with the corporate world and employers, a lot of times you can't just say, this is what I need. They're going to want to know as a workplace, like, why do you need this and what's in it for us as an employer, unfortunately. So it's practicing the whole, this is what I need so that I can blank. So, I need to be able to work on my own quietly for a few hours this afternoon so I can get this to you by my deadline, things like that. So practicing it's like framing, this is my need and how it benefits the employer and how it'll let you be a better, more effective employee. Because if you just say, I need this, and you don't give more context to your employer, it's more likely, unfortunately, that they're going to turn you down and say, I don't think you really need that. And so unfortunately, we have to do a lot of over explaining right now because of how workplace systems are currently set up. I really hope one day that changes, which is kind of why I do what I do.
Well, and I think it's important to bring up the concept of being able to impart lasting change. I recently brought on Yolanda to talk, and she is a big advocate for governance and changing policies, changing specific rules that are in place. I'm more of a culture guy, right? Like, I believe in hearts and minds. I believe in being able to have meaningful conversations one-on-one with people and getting them to care. Where do you fall? Like, how do you kind of like describe it? How do we best be able to impart lasting change within businesses? Is it really kind of like more that realm of like having policies, having rules that are going to outlast each of us within the workplace? Or is it more of having that grassroots effort, interpersonal connection that changes hearts and minds?
I think it's both. I personally, when I work with organizations, I work more on the culture piece. And that's because when you start fixing the culture, like, I don't want to embed myself into anyone's company. I want to empower a company so that they have the tools they need to fix their policies and procedures. I can sit and go through a handbook line by line and help work out policies for you if you don't have anyone on your team who can do it. But if you have an organizational culture where people are managing up, they're speaking honestly, they're saying, this is how meetings could be more effective. This is how our hiring process could be more effective. This could make the onboarding more effective. and you get your team together to put that handbook together and to create the policies and procedures that work best. And you're willing to have that to where it's flexible and so it's agile. And so as things come up and you find things that aren't effective or could be made better, you're willing to flex and change and grow and evolve. Because I think of the workplace as like a living, breathing organism, and people are like the cells in that organism, right? And so we're always learning and growing and evolving as people, I hope. My favorite people are anyway, personally. Yeah. And so if you fix the culture, that's kind of like the foundation for everything. And so having a strong organization or culture makes it easier to frame the policies and procedures around that, because the policies and procedures are also very important. Yeah. You know, they give people alignment of what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And so when all of that is really clear and really transparent, work is more effective because people aren't sure if, you know, they're sure they're doing things in a way that isn't aligned with the company's values and policies. And so all of it's important. I think especially, you know, with neurodivergent team members and things like that, like you really want to have your handbook and your procedures really clear, really easy to find, where everyone knows how to find it. You want to have those job descriptions super, super accurate. That's super important for not just neurodivergent people, but people with any kind of disability, because it lets us know, like, if we really are the right people for the right job. And then also having that flexibility with job descriptions too. It's like, you know, do you need, if you're a company that has, say, delivery drivers, do you need your delivery driver to also know how to work the front desk? Like, why? You know, like things like that, like being more aware, like, well, these skills don't really go together. Why are we pairing them together? And, you know, sometimes it's like you've got someone who's doing some back end things where they're never going to customer interface. And you're like, well, you need to be a really good verbal communicator, but they sit behind a computer and they always email all day and you almost never have to talk to anybody. Why are you asking for that when, if, you know, their written communication could be their skill? And so being mindful and but also agile, but, you know, having that organizational culture piece as the base helps you really nail down those policies and procedures. So it's all important, but like, I'm a culture person too. Like, I think it all starts with the culture and then everything else is kind of scaffolded up from there.
And I think it starts with culture. And I do want to back up to one of your earlier comments, kind of in getting people motivated behind this. I think that it's easiest to find people that share commonality or share lived experience when it comes to disability or neurodiversity of some way, shape, or form. I think too, it always is the other kind of low-hanging fruit are people who have family members with that. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a great place to start, because a lot of times almost everybody knows somebody with a disability. Like it's rare, considering that 26% of Americans have some way, shape, or form that they are different within this world. I think that it's rare that you'll find somebody that genuinely doesn't have anybody within their network. But I think that you can make changes. Like I've been encouraged I go to a lot of conferences, networking with nonprofits, and one of the most interesting things to me is being within this space, and I meet people and I'm asked them, how did you get into this line of work? And they say, well, I applied for the job and I became personally passionate about it. And I think that that's really interesting to me, because it's like they didn't come specifically to help their daughter. They came because they were looking for a good job, and then they became passionate about it. And I think we all have an opportunity to do that kind of within our own individual spaces, of build those advocates within it. I think that I would be remiss to if we didn't talk a little bit more about those that experience the greatest barriers, because I often say to people that the more observable the barrier is, or the more observable the difference that you experience is, the more it's going to be a barrier. And so I'm imagining somebody that is autistic and they are not able to verbally communicate, or I'm imagining somebody that has to constantly stim in order to self-regulate and stuff, and so they might be perceived differently, and there's all kinds of assumptions. So how do we go from this culture leap of like changing the environment and changing the structures to being able to make hiring managers open-minded to considering people that might present differently?
Yeah, I think education and conversations like these are kind of critical for that, especially. There is a really unfortunate misunderstanding that I've seen over and over again about non-speakers, that because someone doesn't speak with their mouth, it means they are incapable or they don't understand the world around them. Or people like in meetings or different situations where non-speakers are present don't have the patience to stop and wait for them to get their communication out, because it might take them longer if they're having to type. A lot of non-speakers also have motor control differences, and that's often why they are non-speaking. And so they might take a bit longer to type. And people also forget that the outgoing output and the ingoing understanding, those are two totally different sensory channels. And so people have a really bad habit of assuming non-speakers or minimal speaking people, or even just shy people who don't talk a lot, aren't paying attention, aren't absorbing, and don't know what's going on. And so that's really important to be aware that just because someone doesn't speak with their mouth, it doesn't mean that they aren't aware of the world around them and they don't have beautiful things that they want to contribute to the world. I know some non-speakers and they are just amazing human beings, but too often they're brushed off and they're not given the chance to come and speak with their communication devices or letterboards or whatever. And so that might mean someone might be in a workplace that needs more support. Maybe they have their support aide or support person coming with them, and that that's something that is really challenging the common ideas of workplace right now. Or an autistic person, they might have meltdowns, or if they are constantly stimming. Like I know I was a lot more visibly stimmy when I was in my corporate job that was really burning me out, because I was completely dysregulated and I was in that hypervigilant state all the time. And so I was visibly a lot more like I could not sit still because I was dysregulated. And that actually was things that came up on my performance reviews multiple times, that I had inappropriate body posture, facial expressions, and movement in front of clients. And it wasn't professional. And that really hurt, because I'd never had any feedback like that before. And it just really made me feel like, something I really couldn't help, that really shouldn't affect my job performance at all, was being used against me as something I needed to get under control or stop doing. And we can't even trust you to be basic professionalism. We can't trust you with anything. And my flapping and rocking, and even right now, I get in trouble. I'm sitting cross-legged in my chair, and I would get in trouble for sitting cross-legged with my feet in the chair at the front desk, because that's not a professional way to sit. And I got in trouble for this in school growing up too. And that's how I sit. I'm sorry. I'm always going to sit like this. And I'm often if I get going, I'll be rocking back and forth while I'm working. And it's who is that really hurting? I do know I have to not be loud and making noises if we're in an office where everyone is needing to be quiet. Yes, that makes sense. But sometimes it's just we need to educate other people where this is coming from, why people might be moving or engaging differently, and give space for that, and really question why is this a problem? Is this really impacting their ability to do the job? Because a lot of times it's not. I was able to do the things I needed to do, even though I was moving and sitting inappropriately in the chair. And even though when I was on site, I was kind of jumping about and things like that, when I was the way my body moved shouldn't have been a reason for me to get in trouble. It didn't impact my ability to do the job I was doing. And so, we have to probably educate leaders, and especially the hiring process, especially the other thing, a lot of autistic people might not give the eye contact, or they might not have learned to fake the eye contact, or we might be really staring really hard, trying really hard to do eye contact. And so it feels and so it's we need to be really just more open to just people engaging with one another and the world around them differently, and realize this doesn't impact people's ability to do the work.
I think I lied. I have one last question for you.
That's fine.
Off of
You have
that,
good questions.
and I think this is July is Disability Pride Month, and it's something that, but a lot of people that get newly diagnosed with a disability, or a lot of people that have experienced a lot of barriers, they have a lot of trouble going from grief to pride. How was that transition for you, and what advice would you give to people for making that shift, and can they hold both simultaneously?
I think it's very possible to hold many different feelings about it simultaneously. I can say I went through so many emotions when I was diagnosed. I definitely had this grief period because it was like, oh, like, because autism is like, this is, this is a permanent thing. This isn't going away. This is never, that was my, like, at my time, like, this is never going to get better. That's what I thought. Because I didn't really understand yet that there were things I could do to support myself that would empower me to be the best version of myself. And also at that time, I was still trapped in the constantly comparing myself to other people. And so other people's version of success, I was trying to mirror that instead of trying to be my own version of success. I also, like, after that, I was really angry for a while. Like, I was just angry that I had gone so many years without knowing the truth about my own brain. I was angry at how many times I've been blamed and by other people, and then had started blaming myself for things that really were beyond my control that I couldn't help. I was angry at my parents for not letting me get tested. I had so many feelings, and the pride and the acceptance and the love for myself is something that has been something I've been working on for the last 10 years. And honestly, it's something I'm still working on. I'm definitely much more proud and love myself way more than I ever have my entire life, but I'll probably always be working on it, because every now and then something will happen and there'll be a struggle, and like I'll kind of get down on myself a little bit, like, oh, why can't I do this one thing? And it's easy to get trapped in that. But for me, what's been the most helpful is really telling myself, like, to stop comparing myself to other people. And so instead, I'm just always trying to, like, I'm gonna use a video game metaphor. If you've ever played a car racing game where you play on one player mode, there's like the little ghost car, and it's like the ghost car is your best lap ever. And so, like, I'm just trying to race my own little ghost car in life. I'm trying to beat my own personal best, and I'm just going to ignore what everyone else is doing, and I'm just going to try to steadily be improving myself in my own way and stop trying to be like other people, because I spent most of my life, when I didn't know I was autistic and ADHD, comparing myself to non-autistic, non-ADHD people, and just constantly it was setting myself up for failure, and a lot of self-hatred and a lot of just negative emotions toward myself that I didn't deserve. And that's because I had no idea that they had very different experiences and brains than I did. And that's, I think now I know, like, whether you're autistic or not, I think comparison really can be a huge thief of all of your joy, because you lose yourself in it. And I completely lost myself in it. And that's why I didn't know myself, my needs, what I even really wanted in life, until I was diagnosed about 10 years ago. And ever since then, I've really been trying to figure that out. Like, what do I need to be successful? What do I want in life? And, how can I be my best version of myself instead of trying to be who other people are, who I think other people think I should be. And I think it's something that a lot of us struggle with. And the longer you work on it, it gets easier. But there's still maybe moments, like maybe I'll have a meltdown or something, and I kind of feel a little get into that shame spiral and things. But that self-compassion thing is really important. Like, another thing I'd say is an exercise you can do if you find yourself berating yourself internally and speaking to yourself, like, in a bad way. It's like, would I speak to other people this way? So then why am I speaking to myself that way? And so if you wouldn't speak to other people that way, I mean, you might, some people might, but like, if you, from the thinking if you treat other people well, don't treat yourself worse than you treat the people around you. And so that's another practice I've been working on, is not talking bad about myself to myself.
I love that perspective. I love the idea of erasing your ghost car, trying to beat your personal best. And I think that's a great starting point for any of us to really try to work on that. Really kind of like self-esteem, but also like self-love that is so necessary to be successful and happy within this world. Lyric, I really appreciate you coming on to share your perspective. It's been so fun. Where can people find you?
I'm pretty easy to find. If you search Neurodivergent Rebel, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Threads, Blue Sky. I spend most of my time probably between Facebook and Substack, but you can also find me on my website, neurodivergentrebel.com, and then neurodivergentconsulting.org. Those are probably the locked in. I'm always going to be there, because who knows with social media, they could blow up one day. You never know.
It's good to have it in multiple different places. Yeah,
I guess I'm on LinkedIn too. We're here on LinkedIn. I forgot. I'm here.
You are available. You're here. Yeah. Well, do connect with Lyric. Check out their many books. Thank you very much for coming on. By the way, everybody that joins me for my regular weekly, next week I'm going to be actually out at multiple different conferences back to back, so I'm going to take a bit of a break. But throughout the week, I am going to be sharing a couple of short form interviews that I'll be taking on the road with me as I'm at Disability in 2026. So please tune in for that, and please drop your own comments in. And if you are going to Disability in, please let me know so we can get a chance to grab some coffee. Until next time, this has been Miles from Peak Performers. Thanks so much for joining us, and thanks, Lyric. It's been good to have you.
Thank you. Bye, all.